Hello, everybody, and Shavua Tov. This is Eve Harrow, and you're listening to Rejuvenation on the Land of Israel Network. Today is Sunday, the 26th of November, 2017, the 8th day of Kislev, 5778, and I'm home. I spent 2 weeks in America, in different venues, speaking to people, mainly about life in Israel and some politics, some of the media work, but also the spiritual aspect of living here, the more personal items on the agenda of how to connect to Hashem, and like some of the things that have happened in my own life. Anyhow, it was a really interesting, if exhausting, 2 weeks. I am very happy to be back home, hit the ground running, of course, and that's why if I sound a little bleary voiced, that would explain it. But I do want to thank Tabitha and Ben for their patience and for helping me put out this show every week, and of course Jeremy and Ari and everybody at the network. And when I go around the outside of Israel, and I hear this also from my colleagues who do the same, it's really gratifying to meet people who hear our voices, who are so happy to meet us in person, but who listen in at least occasionally and are very appreciative of the effort that we put in to try and put a little bit of what life in Israel at really the center point of so many things happening, not just in the Jewish world, but in the world in general, out to them every week. So it is impossible, of course, to look at the date today and not connect it with what happened 70 years ago this week. Today is 26th of November, but on the 29th of November, 1947, we had the very famous or infamous, if you were, partition plan, the UN's proposal for partitioning the land of Israel. The UN proposed the partition. Israel accepted it. The Arabs rejected it and went to war. We talk a lot about a war of independence that happened. Of course, we're coming up. We have our 70th birthday, the equivalent of May 14th, 1948, in the English date. And that's really something that I wanted to talk about now, because I've always found that date, we don't call it the 29th of November. We call it Kaf Tet November. And Kaf Tet in Hebrew letters, each letter in the Hebrew language, and if you don't, I keep saying this, you need to learn Hebrew to really understand so much, not just about the Tanakh, but about the modern world of Israel. But Kaf Tet symbolizes 29. Kaf is 20. Each letter in the Hebrew alphabet has a numerical equivalent, 1 through 10, and then following that, I guess you could say it's kind of like Roman numerals in that sense. So following that goes by 10. So Kaf is 20, Tet is 9. And you don't hear this date referred to as the 29th of November. You hear this date referred to as Kaf Tet November. Every city in Israel has a street, Kaf Tet November, commemorating this date. And I find that fascinating. I don't know of another date that has this mix of the secular calendar, meaning November is not a Jewish month, it's a secular calendar, but Kaf Tet is straight out of the Hebrew calendar. And if anybody knows of any date, please any other date that's like this, let me know. But I do believe that it means that there is somewhat of a religious element that was put even into this secular date, because we don't commemorate the Hebrew date. This happened, we commemorate the date on the English calendar, but still, there was something in here that saw it as the beginnings of the redemption, the prophecies coming true, even with the, again, so-called secular leadership at the time. And again, and I say this all the time, that there's no such thing as true secular when it comes to Israeli society today. But in any event, Kaf Tet November is a very unusual date. And 70 years ago this week, the UN proposed partitioning the western part of the British mandate for Palestine. The eastern part, the 75% or so, had already been given away to create an Arab entity known as Transjordan, Kingdom of Jordan. And so as opposed to the narrative that you most usually hear of the poor Palestinians whose land was taken away from them by those greedy Jews who somehow convinced Britain in a moment of weakness to give them something, maybe over guilt from the Holocaust, which might or might not have happened. And of course, they are the true victims of the Holocaust because the Jews come here and do to them exactly what was being done to us in Europe, if that really happened. Anyway, a lot of confusing different messages there, but the ultimate goal, of course, is to make the Arabs here the ultimate victims and still suffering after 70 years. All this, of course, is one big fat lie. But the western part of Palestine, the land of Israel, what's between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean, is once again partitioned by the UN, and this time by the UN, into a Jewish state and an Arab state, pretty much based on the population breakdown. Also the Jews had done a tremendous job at settling the Negev, and so the larger part of that map, and this is a radio show, not a visual show, so you're going to have to crank out that map for yourselves. But when you look at if you're not familiar with the land of Israel, and if you're not, you should be, the bottom triangle there is mainly Negev. It's mainly the desert, and that's really the part that the Jews were given because they had greened it, had brought water in, and were making the desert bloom. But places like Beersheba, the capital of the Negev, which is now approaching 250,000 people and really turning into a big city, finally, that was going to be given to the Arabs. And it was mainly based on the population centers. So the Jews were going to get about 15,000 square miles, about 54%, to be a Jewish democratic state, and about 12,000 kilometers. And the remaining 12,000 square kilometers, about 45%, was going to be an Arab democratic state. Did you hear that? Yes, not an oxymoron, at least not 70 years ago. An Arab democratic state. And then about 1%, which was mainly Greater Jerusalem, was going to be internationalized, gerrymandering Bethlehem in, because Jerusalem was mainly Jews. And if you're breaking down things by population centers, really Jerusalem should have been given to the Jews. But in order to not give it to the Jews, Bethlehem is worked into there. So it's really Jerusalem, Bethlehem. And therefore, it's about 50% Jewish, about 50% Muslim. And therefore, it can be internationalized and not given to the Jews. And there's not even a corridor for the Jews from the fledgling Jewish state into Jerusalem. Anyhow, that map is voted on by the UN. 33 countries backed it, 13 were against, and 10 countries abstained, including Great Britain. And the leadership of the Jews here of the Yishuv accepted this plan, even without Jerusalem as our capital. It is 2 years after the end of World War II, and we need our own country. We needed it a few years before. Had the British actually done what they promised to do, maybe we wouldn't have had 6 million dead in Europe, because they would have had a place to go to, because nobody else would let the Jews in. But at least this, and the Jews accepted this, and the Arabs did not. And really, our War of Independence starts now, 70 years ago, even though it's in May of 1948, when Israel declares independence as the British quit the mandate. And then were attacked by 7 Arab armies, and the official War of Independence starts. Really, there was a 6-month war of the local Arabs here, continuing from the time of the partition plan until the official establishment of the State of Israel. So really, the War of Independence starts 70 years. The official War of Independence starts 70 years ago this week. And still our most devastating war in terms of percentages. 1% of the Jewish population here is killed, 6,000 out of 600,000 people. So none of this do I ever for 1 minute take for granted. And as the world spins, as I think even more and more, not just out of control, but further away from the truth. And, you know, I just came back from the States, and yes, I was speaking to people in the main this time who I didn't have like debate situations or hostile environments that I was speaking in. I have had on other trips, and that's fine. I have no problem in defending my positions in front of different audiences. If people are willing to listen, that's great. Sometimes people are just not willing to listen, but it's just incredible how far from the truth of Israel the world is going. And in that, you have to realize that there's something really off here, if not insane, if not anti-Semitic, if not real enmity. It's not about the issue. Like, last week, right before Shabbat, right? So on Friday, for those of you who weren't, for my audience in America, if you weren't in a glazed turkey stupor still from the Thanksgiving holiday. And here we give thanks every day. So I didn't have turkey. I love Thanksgiving, but it's not an Israeli holiday. And I give thanks every single day for this country and for what I have. But on Friday, 305 Sufis were murdered in the northern Sinai, probably by ISIS, although take your pick. It's just amazing. It's just amazing. The Sufis, when people call Islam the religion of peace, it really would be, if the Sufis were the ones running the show. They're the mystical Muslims, they're the whirling dervishes. They're the ones who see the good in mankind and are willing to live with other people. They're really the God-fearing in the sense of the good God, and not the God that makes you kill other people in order to establish your fealty to him. And they're murdered in the northern Sinai. Does anybody care? Does anybody really care? Is Linda Sarsour now organizing some kind of demonstration? Is Black Lives Matter getting out there and saying Sufi lives matter? Are all the people who spend night and day, Jews included, by the way, and this is, I say with such great pain, are they now organizing demonstrations for the Sufis and saying, like, this is just terrible and maybe Islam needs a little bit of tweaking and what the hell is going on? Or no, are they going to still be saying we shouldn't be eating dates from the Jordan Valley and Israel is just such a terrible place and the Jews are just such awful people? So guess which one is going to be happening this week? And it's such a patronizing attitude, really, when you come down to it. It's like, well, even among people who would say that there's no such thing as Islamophobia, of course there is such thing as Islamophobia. A phobia is when it's irrational, okay? So it's not irrational. It's not irrational at all to be afraid of certain elements of Islam. And therefore, I guess you could say it's not a phobia. It's a very rational fear. But is that like what's going on in the world? Does that bear any relation to the reality of, are those people who defend Islam now coming out and saying, well, I think Islam is this wonderful religion and therefore these kinds of people need to be stopped? No, it's more like, well, a kind of what do you expect attitude, which really ultimately is quite racist and quite patronizing. Like, we can't expect any better from them. I do. I expect better from everybody, especially people who claim that they are God people. God people are the last ones who should behave like this, like animals. If you really believe in God and you believe that he created the world in his image and everybody in the world in his image, which is what Judaism does. Judaism doesn't feel like we've got some kind of in with God or some kind of lock on God, and the only way to really know God is to be Jewish. Quite the opposite. It's one of the talks that I gave when I was in the States. A short one, but something that has been kicking around in my mind for a while about if Judaism is imperialistic, which it isn't, cut to the chase. But we're not like that. We don't feel that we've got the only truth. We have a special job in the world that Hashem has asked us to do, but everybody is created in God's image. And when you in any way aid and abet a religion that is doing the exact opposite now, then how can you call yourself a religious person? How can you even say that you're a human being? Forget where you stand vis-a-vis God. And until this kind of behavior is given absolutely no space with which to continue, no help at all from the side or a tacit agreement or just by silence, then we're in for a really, really rough ride. And that has nothing to do with being anti-Muslim or anti-Arab. That has to do with being pro-humanity. And it's just really so upsetting that people aren't seeing what's happening here and how enabling this kind of behavior in any way, shape, or form is just taking the world down a very, very dangerous path, and something that I believe that my country here and my people have a role to play in saying, like, this is just wrong. This is just flat out wrong. So, of course, wishing a return to recovery for the people who were wounded, many, many children as well. I don't know how anybody who survived that massacre, though, can in any way have a full recovery of the trauma of seeing relatives and friends be murdered in front of their eyes. And I think it's just a travesty that that this kind of thing continues and will happen again, of course. And stupid articles like Anshel Pfeiffer's article about how Egypt is paying the price for letting the northern Sinai go and not be under control is really kind of missing the point. Okay, it isn't because the Egyptian army isn't in the northern Sinai. Okay, yes, that's why these things can happen if there isn't a strong whatever to stop it, and not that the Egyptian army are a group of righteous people either. But this is a threat to the regime, so fine. It's happening because there's a mentality that says that it's okay to take weapons into a house of worship or any house. It doesn't matter if it was a bar, lock the doors and just start slaughtering people right and left. That's what the real problem is. And until that is dealt with and excuses aren't being made anymore for this kind of behavior, the world is in for a very, very, very rough ride. So you can only do what you can do. And that's what I'm busy doing, what I think it is that Hashem wants me to do in this world. So I spent 2 weeks in the States. I went to southern Florida, which was so nice and warm. Broke out my sandals, even got a pedicure. So I'm now looking at very bright red toenails. I had, been done with my sandal feet because it was getting cold here in Israel. And back in Florida, though, you gotta just do that again. So that was fun. But I worked there. I didn't just go get pedicures. I worked there. I spoke for Camera, a couple of evenings. Camera, the media watchdog that I'm also privileged to be a part of here in Israel, and speaking to people about the importance of, yes, sometimes it could be tilting at windmills, but the importance of speaking the truth, even when it seems like nobody's listening, even on the campuses, which some people think are just totally gone. They're not totally gone, and Camera's got some great programs on the campuses, but also in really calling onto the carpet the New York Times and other very influential news organizations that insist on spreading lies about Israel and about other things and about whatever their version of liberalism is, which isn't liberalism. It's some insane left-wing ideas that has now veered perilously close to really, and not even close, there into anti-Semitism and to meeting the far right on that very common ground of hating my people. And so spoke for them, met some really wonderful people, wonderful, caring people who've devoted their lives to a great degree to Jewish organizations, be it Camera, be it AIPAC, be it JNF, although something that's quite heartbreaking is that some of the people that I met have not been able to bring down that love of Judaism to their children and to their grandchildren, the Jewish values that cross with American values, so that's been fine. But too many people that I met have Jewish children and grandchildren who Judaism is not important to them, who've married non-Jews or are raising non-Jewish children. And it's not enough to care about whatever it is that you think Jewish values are, and we can have a discussion on that as well, without a framework of Judaism, without Shabbat, without the distinctive things that the boundaries that have kept Judaism alive for so many years. And yes, some of those can be tweaked. Some of them are maybe ideas and issues. And I believe that also that were okay for the many years in the diaspora and that maybe need to be changed now that we have a home, but maybe only if you're in that home, and that you have to be more strongly Jewish in terms of that framework. If you're not here, as you're not living the Jewish life just in the street, and there are always the pressures and even the seductions of the non-Jewish world out there, outside of your home. And so many of my co-religionists have fallen to that, and their children and grandchildren just being Jewish isn't all that important to them, or isn't important at all. And that's really a heartbreak. And the numbers of the assimilation and the numbers of Jews just not getting married, the numbers of Jews just not having Jewish families are rising all the time. And to the point where one night during the course of my trip, I actually went back to my room and cried, because it's failing, and I don't know what's going to happen to the Jews of the diaspora if this is symbolic of what's happening because it's easy, because it's not important. When things are easy, then do they become not important anymore when you don't have to fight for something? It seems so sad to say that only when you're made aware that you're Jewish because of anti-Semitism, then it means something to you. I don't know. And that's also not so true, because there were plenty of Jews, let's say in Nazi Germany, who, my own father's family included, who were like running from Judaism, and didn't want to belong to the people that were being persecuted. So there's a lot of different answers for why Jews leave Judaism. But it's when there's so much rich Jewish life that's available, especially in the United States, in different communities, and synagogues and schools and colleges, and the easy availability of kosher food, things that were once so difficult to get, and not having to work on Shabbat, and people understanding Jewish holidays, and people leaving Judaism. It's just not important enough. And places that I went to where people who do send their children to Jewish schools, but are complaining to me about how they don't like what's going on in the Jewish schools, that there's a lot of things that the teachers are teaching their kids that they feel are not Jewish values, or much more the so-called American liberal values now. And so my question is, so why are you sending your kids to schools like this? Why are you paying a lot of money for your kids to get that kind of Jewish education? The answer was, well, we like the other parents, and my kids have friends there, and overall it's okay. And so what do you mean overall it's okay? You like everything about the Jewish education that your children are getting except the education part? So how does that fit in? And you're paying a lot of money for that, and then you're going to be surprised in 5 or 10 years when your kids' values and the things that they're saying to you don't meet up with what you're teaching them at home. But from the course of most of the day, they're being almost intimidated, because some teachers, if you don't agree with them, will just not give you a good grade. The classrooms are not safe spaces anymore to voice an opinion that's different from the teacher. And with all the pressure of doing well in school so that you can get into some top university, it's going to take a very, very brave young person in order to stand up to the teacher and say, I disagree with that, and I don't want to be learning Palestinian poetry in this classroom. And I don't, some of the things that you're saying don't jive. And so you're throwing goldfish into a shark tank, expecting them to survive. It gets even worse when they get to university. You're paying a lot of money to do that, and this all makes sense. So maybe I'm missing something. It could be that I'm missing something. Absolutely, it could be that I'm missing something. But I don't get it. I really just don't get it. And we're going to see what happens in the next 10, 15, or 20 years, and how these kids who are now in those environments, where they're going to be vis-a-vis Israel, vis-a-vis Judaism, vis-a-vis some of the other values that they have, that are not necessarily, forget Torah values, even, just like a lot of that Torah morality that seems to have also gone by the boards. So I came home a little bit confused, and that's after being with people who, as I said, weren't giving me a hard time, yet seemed to have given up to some degree on what it is that is so important to them, but or maybe none of us realize, and I'm speaking for myself as a parent also, the tremendous influence that the outside world has on our children. So we think, and yes, we can do that, and we should do that around our own tables. That's why Shabbat is so important, because you actually can catch your kids away from all their stuff, but not realizing the tremendous pull of the outside world and the values that aren't necessarily ours on our kids. And here I'm speaking not just to Jews, but to Christians and to people with conservative small c values, wow, it's scary out there. And again, I speak as a parent also, and my kids haven't been immune to that either. And I don't know how we're going to deal with this, but when you come in from the outside with a different perspective, sometimes you can see things a little more clearly and say, guys, like, whoa, what's going on here? So I can only try. But I went from Florida over to Phoenix, still had that pedicure out, still had those sandals, so beautiful in the Valley of the Sun. And I want to give a shout out to Arthur and Amy Rothstein and to Adam and Val Brodsky for bringing me into Phoenix. Arthur and Amy were just incredible hosts, brought me into their synagogue, Makor, a scholar in residence. beautiful little synagogue, mainly made of people who are finding their way back to Judaism or finding Judaism for the first time in their lives, and getting involved with prayers, getting involved with Torah learning. A lot of the campus also there. Some of the kids coming in there who have one Jewish parent and who suddenly are interested in Judaism. It wasn't something that they were exposed to growing up, and now they're looking for that, and they're looking to establish Jewish homes. And it was really a great experience for me, really a privilege to be able to speak to the community both on Friday night and during Shabbat, and as well co-sponsored with the JCC, the Jewish Community Center, the Valley of the Sun Jewish Community Center, on Sunday to a larger audience. And hopefully, at least what they said, they'd like to invite me back. So I would love to get back there and speak to more people and bring it out and connect people with Israel. Always great to see people that I have seen here, that I've guided here, like the Rothsteins and the Brodskys, and then go back and see their home environment, what it is that they, that where they're trying to raise their children. It, to that degree, is easier here in Israel to raise at least Jewish-minded children, if not Torah-valued children. That's another struggle that we're having here in Israel because the environment is Jewish. So sometimes people think that they could slack off on some of the more religious values, and that's a struggle that we have here in Israel. But I learned so much from my trips. Hopefully I teach people things or explain and connect. The point is to connect, and to connect in a respectful way, and to educate. But I also am educated, and I love meeting people. Some people that I meet, in particular one couple that I'm thinking of in Phoenix that I met, and just like really connected immediately. You know how sometimes you just really like people from the first sentence, and then on the other hand, sometimes you really dislike people also from the first sentence. So I found people that I really connected with immediately in Phoenix. If you believe in the recycling of souls, or not recycling, that sounds so plastic baggy, but that you've been around the block before, and there's people that you've met in a different place or a different way, and both for the good and for the bads, right? So there's definitely people that I instinctively dislike, or maybe they just remind me of people that in my life that I dislike, and people that I just instinctively like. So that happened in Phoenix. Of course, floating around on a canyon didn't hurt either for that day, on a lake in a canyon. So that was, these people that that you're going to meet again, and hope that you'll meet again. And then went on to LA. Toes now not so much out during the day, but not in the evening. It was colder in LA than I thought it would be, and had a parlor meeting for One Israel Fund, which was very interesting. And again, got to meet some people who are very devoted to Israel, even from pretty far away on the West Coast. And I'm from LA, so it's like going home and then being grateful. I have to say that I'm not in LA anymore. And that I moved to Israel close to 30 years ago. It's been a crazy ride, but I'm happy that I made that choice. And then over to the East Coast, now definitely into closed shoes, and speaking in Brooklyn at the Kingsway Jewish Center. Lovely, lovely people there, people who I have seen here in Israel, some people who've been on my buses and taken trips around with me, and now hopefully people who will do more so, and very receptive, and just talking about some of the common issues that we have with our kids, with our grandchildren, that have to be discussed, that just have to be discussed. We cannot give up. We cannot give up. We have to keep saying, even if nobody's listening, and there are people listening, look, we can only do what we can do. And sometimes someone will say to me, like, why are you wasting your time? Really, you're going out there with a message that is just not politically correct these days. And I'm thinking about that also because at the end of December, I'm going to Limud, UK, where people will tell me, like, that's just totally not your environment. But getting out of my comfort zone is something that I do, and feeling that if there is something happening, it has to be expressed. I don't have the right to want to be popular, and so therefore I just have to say things that will get me more audiences. And I know people like that. I know people who have changed their views. I'm not going to mention names, but I know people who have I don't know if they've really changed their views, but they do in public say things that will get them more speaking engagements in front of bigger audiences with very big fat checks for saying things that people want to hear. But that's not what I can do. I have to say the truth as I see it, as I live it from Israel. And so, yeah, it's going to limit me to where I speak. I'm not going to end up speaking to hundreds of people in front of a packed audience and get $10,000 a speaking engagement, because I'm not saying things that are popular, but I'm saying things that I believe have to be said. And so, yeah, it's self-limiting, but at least at the end of the day, I can feel like I didn't bow to the winds of, like I said, of political correctness, and more doing what I feel Hashem wants me to do, and what my heart and my head, they're aligned in this, tell me that I need to do. And so I had a beautiful night in Livingston, New Jersey, with about 50 women, and that wasn't politics. That was really more Judaism and women and Israel and some of the personal issues that we all struggle with, and where Hashem can come to help us, not by giving us the answers, but by giving us the strength so we can find the answers on our own. And so many people struggling with issues in their marriage and in their health and with relationships and with their children. Judaism doesn't provide the panacea for that, but definitely can give you like that family grounding, and like I said, and the strength of community, the strength of prayer, the strength of feeling that there's a lot of people who went before us and who dealt with things and who coped with things. Doesn't mean that you solve the issues, but at least you have the strength to deal with them, and the understanding that, so at the end of the day, we don't understand, but there is some kind of meaning to everything that we're doing. And what you can't not do is not try. And so everybody has issues. And again, I was blown away by some of the really difficult situations that some of the women are in and how they're coping with them. And by sharing some of my experiences and learning from them, their experience and how they're dealing with things, I was really humbled to meet women who are going through just really, if it's abusive marriage, whatever it is, they're going through and are coming out on the other side. What I can tell you after my whole trip is that money does not buy happiness. And the correlation between wealth, and I was with some extremely wealthy people, and happiness is not there. It keeps you from being hungry, and it means that if you have a problem, you can go get help for it, be it a physical problem or be it an emotional problem. But to say that if you have a certain kind of economic stability, then you also have emotional and spiritual stability. Sometimes I was thinking that it's even the opposite, that some people who are there already and don't have the challenges, the economic challenges that others have to look for other ways and to fulfill that need for some kind of goal, if that goal's already been reached. So, and sometimes those goals are not good ones. When you're financially secure, then sometimes looking for the kicks is not in terms of getting ahead on your career, getting ahead on other things. The excitement that people are looking for, taking them away from the good things in their lives. And everybody, I think, out there knows what I'm talking about. And so that's something that also, I think, have to, be watched. I saw and heard and spoke to different psychologists and different people and people in the Jewish world as well, deep into the Jewish world, that some of the wealth and some of the security has brought with it then the commensurate, like I said, going out into behaviors that are not so healthy, and that can actually destroy the families and destroy everything that people worked so hard to build. So it's something that we all have to be so careful about and have that balance, have a balance always in our lives between appreciation, which is really, I guess, what this last weekend was about. If it hasn't been taken over completely by Black Friday and all the sales and all the commercialism, but really getting back down to it is being grateful for what we have and not having a sense of entitlement. Although it was funny because I spent Shabbat surrounded by a lot of ex-British now living in Israel at a family function. And it's funny because, and yes, now when you think about it, it does make sense. Thanksgiving means different things to somebody who grew up in England. Okay, it's those uppity colonies and their independence. And so it's very funny. And it comes back down to things being about perspective, I suppose. So, but I hit the ground running when I got home to Israel on Thursday. I ran a bus trip for One Israel Fund because it was Thanksgiving and people were here in Israel who normally aren't here because they came for a long weekend. And that was the day that reconnected me to Israel in such a beautiful way. We started off in Piduel, in a community. The day was spent in western Binyamin, just north of Jerusalem, but far in the sense of being in this gorge, which is also where the Maccabees hid when they had their guerrilla war against the Seleucids about 2,200 years ago, that led to independence for 100 years in the Second Temple period and our holiday of Hanukkah. But we started off in Piduel, which overlooks the airport. These are all places, of course, that people would say the Jews have no right to live in, and these are all so-called settlements. But Piduel overlooks the airport. The security argument is just so no-brainer. But what we did is we went to visit a kindergarten where these kids, there's just no line at all between so-called secular things and Torah. So they're planting wheat, and then they're convinced that when the cloud then comes over to water the little wheat patch in the backyard, that Hashem brought that cloud, because obviously, like, you pray for rain, and then Hashem brings the cloud to water the wheat. And when they made little pizzas for us. So it's accompanied by the prayers of thanks for having the food. And while they're learning about nature and about weather and about how things grow, they're learning it in a way that shows that it all comes from Hashem. And there was just, like, when I grew up, there were secular studies and there were religious studies. And here it's all together, and everything was done with song and with movement and with happiness. I thought, oh my God, what a beautiful kindergarten this is. And it's a special project. It's different kindergartens all over Israel. And so they need funding, which is why I took people there in order to get out of the little apartment that they're in and have a proper classroom. Such a beautiful way of educating children. You could just see that these children are just, they're happy. They're strong in their Judaism. They're strong in their relationship with Hashem. It's just like obvious that He created the world and that the good things that are here are things that He gave to us. And wow, I mean, to be 3 years old again and to be able to learn, the teachers were just so impressive and so joyous and so loving. It was just great. And from there, we went over to Talmon, and Talmon is the community where the rabbi of the community, I think I must have told this story before, the rabbi of their community, whose name I always mess up, so I'm not going to say it. He's now the rabbi of the police in Israel, and he's a rabbi that I heard of a few years ago because there is a motorcycle group that goes around Israel everywhere, and they go on Shabbat, and since Talmon is right on the main road, they asked permission to be able to drive through Talmon on Shabbat. And Talmon is a community, normally their gates are closed on Shabbat. It's a religious community. They don't have traffic on Shabbat. But the rabbi years ago gave permission. But not only that, when they showed up there, the motorcyclists, they were met with cake and with coffee and with a kiddush. They were met with a warm community who welcomed them. And I remember thinking at the time, wow, what a brilliant rabbi. Instead of saying like, okay, fine, and kind of grudgingly saying, all right, you can drive through my community, he welcomed them. He made Shabbat for them, which is what Shabbat is supposed to be about. And so it came as no surprise to me when I heard that he was given a fairly important job in Israel. And I would hope that rabbis like him are not few and far between. Although, unfortunately, sometimes I think that they're more rare than they should be. So we were in Talmon, and we went to visit the Pinach Hama, the warm corner for soldiers. And then we went to this incredible woman, Ora, who makes ceramics. And I found myself drawn to this bowl, just a beautiful bowl, which I ended up buying. Had a hole in the middle of it in the bottom. And I figured, okay, maybe it's, I don't know, maybe, I don't really know why there was a hole in it. And then she told me that it's really a sink. But I loved it as a bowl. So it's now my new fruit bowl in my kitchen. I love ceramics. I love people who work with the earth, especially the earth in the land of Israel, and who are talented and creative and artistic, all of which I am woefully not. And so I figured, okay, well, it's a small hole, and maybe one day if we ever build another house in Israel, this will be my sink there. But in the meantime, it's a beautiful bowl, and you can't see the hole because I put a piece of fruit over it. So I guess I came home that day with the kitchen sink, but everybody loved her. I try and at least, go like to one artist because there's such creativity in these hills. There's such creativity in Judea and Samaria, and she was no exception, and just a bubbly, warm, colorful person in her own right. And then we went from there to Dolev to visit a school for girls who are at risk because their family, they come from very dysfunctional families or terrible things have happened to them. And it's a heartbreak that there are girls like this in Israel, that there are families that are dysfunctional. But just like everywhere, we're also dealing with people who are dealing with things. And but the whole community of Dolev rallies to help the girls in this school. Every single family takes the girls in for Shabbat and loves them and cares for them and models for them what a healthy nuclear family should look like. Because if you don't have an example, where are you going to know? When someone is raised in a dysfunctional family, then they need help to figuring out. It's not enough to know what not to do. You have to know what to do. And I can speak a little bit of that from personal experience, and it's a very hard thing. And so they have people to model for them and families that love them and care for them. And because they're far from the big city, so they're less exposed to some of the temptations of the big city. And the school does incredible work in putting these girls back on their feet. And we heard there from Karen Orbach, whose son Erez was killed by terrorists in January. It'll be a year when the truck in Jerusalem just ran over 4 soldiers. So her son was one of the soldiers. And she talked a little bit about him and of his dreams that will not be fulfilled. And it was really just an honor to be able to listen to her. I don't know where she gets the strength, and I know too many women who do this, and I don't know where they get the strength from to be able to do this and to go on in what's probably the most difficult thing that can ever happen to somebody in losing a child. So she's involved with the school, and she talked a little bit about Erez. And from there we went on to Neve Tzuf, which is a community that has had just a horrible year, suffered from arson fires a few months ago where homes were burnt down, like 30 homes were either burnt down completely or damaged by arson fires that were set by Arabs in the area, because that's an easy way to do terrorism. And so they're still reeling from that. And then they had terrorism in their community, the Solomon family that was butchered on a Friday night. And so some of the challenges of securing the communities, and due to a lot of the work of the One Israel Fund, these things don't happen as often as our enemies would like them to happen. And a lot of people are caught. It doesn't make the news because if it bleeds, it leads. And when something doesn't happen, it's not on the news. But a lot of good things are happening that you're not reading about because we're preventing that kind of terror. But to go to the community, to talk to the people, to see where the houses were burnt down, to see where the infiltration happened, to see the area in which they live and how they punch above their weight in a beautiful and very strategic area. There's nothing like being out there. There's nothing like meeting the people. There's nothing like seeing these places, learning the history, not just of the Hashmonaim, of the Maccabees, seeing the olives, and of course the holiday is all about the olive oil, and you're seeing the olive trees just loaded with the fruit now as we harvest them and understand the connection, but once again, between our holiday season and the agricultural cycle in the land of Israel, but also the challenges. We're not yet there. We're not yet there to where we need to be. We're stronger than we were 70 years ago. And I stand on the shoulders of giants, but we still have work to do. And it's so-called little people who are doing a lot of the heavy lifting. And it's really the privilege of my life to be able to live among them and to in any way introduce those who don't know them to them and see another side of Israeli society, and especially a side that's so vilified by the world. And it's so the opposite of what's really happening here. So I love turning that around. And then, of course, at the end of the day, Psagot Winery, and enjoying really some of the fruits of the vines of this beautiful country, and bringing back something that we used to do that we're now doing again. And I talk about that a lot. But that was really fun and a relaxing way to end the day. And not just relaxing, but enjoying Israel and appreciating Israel in another way. So that was my last couple of weeks. And if I sound tired, it's because I am, but it's good. And I get rejuvenated just by coming home and just by doing what I do and feeling so blessed by Hashem and so grateful and so full of thanksgiving for the place that I've chosen to make my home, for the opportunity to have this be my home. And once again, as my plane flew, my El Al flight flew, and the coast of Israel is outside. I always get a window seat if I can. And the coast of Israel I see beneath me, and my eyes fill with tears, as they are again now, with such gratitude for being able to call the land of Israel my home, and for being able to be free to express my Judaism and live a full Jewish life. And so that is really Thanksgiving every single day in every single way. So wherever you are and wherever you're listening to this, I hope that you are full of thanks for your health and for your family. And just keep on. If you're listening to this, then I assume that you somewhat see things the way those of us here on the network see them. And keep fighting for that. Keep fighting for the world as we know that it should be, and not in the direction that other people are trying to take it. That's what we as individuals have to do. And if we do it together, then really our whole is so much greater than the sum of our parts. So Shavua Tov, everybody. It's Eve Harrow. Once again, thanks to Tabitha and to Ben and to everybody on the network. I'm looking forward to an exciting week. I'll be back, I hope. So take care, everybody. Shavua Tov. Goodbye.